Hello everyone. Let's talk about something that lives deep in the heart of our personal growth journeys: striving versus self-acceptance. This isn't a conversation about choosing one over the other. It's not a battle. It's not a debate. It's an invitation to get curious about what drives us, what limits us, and what liberates us. We live in a culture that celebrates hustle. More degrees, more success, more followers. Striving is often seen as noble, and to a certain extent, it is. It means we care. It means we want to grow. But here's where it gets tricky. When our striving is driven by shame, by the belief that we are not enough unless we achieve something, then it becomes toxic. I've spent 2 decades researching shame, and I'll tell you this. "I'll be worthy when" is one of the most dangerous stories we tell ourselves. Striving becomes dangerous when it's rooted in fear of not being lovable, not being accepted, or not being seen. That's not growth, that's survival. When I lose the weight, get the job, heal the trauma, then I'll accept myself. But self-acceptance doesn't come at the end of the journey. It's not a prize we win. It's the starting point. I am enough isn't complacency, it's courage. Accepting yourself as you are right now is radical. It's vulnerable. And it's the only way we can pursue meaningful change without burning out or betraying ourselves. Here's where it gets powerful. You don't have to choose between striving and self-acceptance. You can want to grow and still love yourself. This is the end space. I am proud of who I am and I'm working on becoming better. That space is emotionally intelligent. It's balanced. It's where healthy ambition lives. It's where striving is fueled by curiosity and courage, not shame and fear. Want to know what connects striving and self-acceptance? Vulnerability. It's the willingness to say, I want to grow, but I'm not going to hate myself in the process. I'm learning, and I'm showing up imperfectly. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the purest form of strength. It's how we show up fully human. When we allow ourselves to be seen striving and all, we create lives rooted in authenticity, not perfectionism. Seedling final words. So here's the invitation. Strive because you care. Accept yourself because you're worthy. And hold space for both. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. When we talk about the tension between striving and self-acceptance, it's easy to assume that ambition, the desire to do better, be better, reach for something more, is somehow the villain in the story. But I want to say something clearly, and from both my heart and years of research: striving is not the enemy. Shame is. Striving, at its core, is deeply human. It's rooted in the idea that we are capable of growth, of change, of creativity. Striving says, I believe there's more in me, and I want to explore it. That kind of energy is beautiful. It comes from a place of curiosity, self-awareness, and courage. It's the energy that has built great art, launched meaningful movements, healed families, and advanced communities. Healthy striving is forward motion. It's life-giving. It's a response to the question, what's possible? But here's the trap: many of us aren't striving from that space. Instead, we're hustling for our worth. We've internalized the message, sometimes loudly and sometimes in whispers, that we aren't enough. We grow up in systems that tell us, you're only worthy if you're productive. You're only lovable if you're attractive. You're only respected if you're successful. And that's where striving becomes distorted. Because now, instead of moving towards something, we're running away from something. We're running from the fear of being seen as not enough. We're running from shame. Shame is that quiet but powerful voice that says, who do you think you are? It doesn't just question what we do, it attacks who we are. And it's incredibly efficient. Shame can attach itself to anything: how we look, how we parent, our grades, our bodies, our relationships, our bank accounts. It convinces us that unless we meet a certain standard, one that's often arbitrary and impossible, we are unworthy of love, connection, and belonging. And when striving becomes the mask we wear to cover that shame, we lose something essential. We lose authenticity. We lose joy. We lose the ability to pause and appreciate where we are, because we are so afraid of what it means to stop moving. Shame-driven striving doesn't allow rest. It doesn't celebrate progress. It whispers that unless we're constantly proving our value, we're failing. And that's not growth, that's survival mode. I want to be really clear here, there's nothing wrong with wanting more for your life. Wanting to improve your health, your relationships, your skills, that's beautiful. But the motivation matters. Are you chasing a vision of the life you want to create, or are you running from a version of yourself you were told wasn't good enough? That's the defining line between striving and hustling for worthiness. Let me share an example. A woman once told me, I'm always setting goals, but every time I reach one, I just set another. I never feel satisfied. I never feel like I've made it. When I asked what happens when she tries to pause and celebrate her progress, she said, I feel guilty. Like I'm getting lazy. That's not healthy striving. That's shame driving the car. That's a belief system that says, you are only as good as your next accomplishment. Shame has a sneaky way of dressing itself up as ambition. But here's a truth I want to offer you, you can strive without self-rejection. You can be ambitious without abandoning yourself. In my research on wholehearted living, I found that the people who live the most engaged, meaningful lives don't strive because they're ashamed of who they are. They strive because they are already grounded in the belief that they are enough. From that foundation, growth becomes an expression of self-love, not self-punishment. They are not trying to earn their worth through perfection. They are practicing growth from a place of authenticity and self-respect. Think about how this plays out in education, in workplaces, even in parenting. We reward people for overachieving, for perfectionism, for staying late and never saying no. But when we start to examine what's beneath that behavior, we often find people who are terrified of disappointing others. People who have internalized the message that rest equals laziness. That vulnerability equals weakness. That failure equals worthlessness. That is shame culture. And it's not sustainable. It's not humane. And it's certainly not the kind of striving that leads to long-term fulfillment. Instead, we need to redefine what success looks like, not just in terms of outcomes, but in terms of how we feel about ourselves along the way. Striving, when it's rooted in self-respect, becomes an act of purpose. We can say, I am already enough and I want to explore what more I'm capable of. That's different. That's expansive. That's generous. And it's deeply courageous. Because it means we are willing to show up imperfectly. It means we are willing to be seen, not just for what we achieve, but for who we are underneath all the striving. That kind of vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of strength. And when we start to separate shame from ambition, when we allow ourselves to grow without self-criticism, we start to thrive. We don't just succeed, we live more fully. So no, striving is not the enemy. It never was. Wanting to do better, to be better, is deeply human. But we have to ask, what's fueling it? Is it a belief in your potential or fear that you're not enough without the achievement? Let's strive with love. Let's grow with grace. And let's never confuse hustle for worthiness. You are already enough, and from there, anything is possible. One of the most pervasive myths in our culture is the idea that self-acceptance is something we earn. That it's a prize waiting for us at the end of a long, exhausting journey of self-improvement. We often think, once I lose the weight, get the job, finish the degree, make more money, finally get it together, then I'll love myself. Then I'll be proud. Then I'll rest. But here's the truth, self-acceptance is not the finish line. It's the foundation. It's the ground we're supposed to stand on while we do the hard, messy, courageous work of becoming. The idea that we have to earn our worth is not just misguided, it's damaging. It trains us to treat ourselves like projects to be fixed rather than people to be loved. We become hyper-focused on our flaws, our shortcomings, all the places we believe we fall short of perfection. We withhold compassion from ourselves in hopes that shame will motivate us to do better, be better. But shame is not a long-term motivator. It might get you a quick burst of effort, but it will leave you exhausted, disconnected, and stuck in a cycle of never enoughness. Self-acceptance, on the other hand, is about recognizing your inherent worth not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. It's saying, I am a work in progress and I am worthy of love, connection, and belonging right now, as I am. That doesn't mean you give up on growth. It doesn't mean you stop striving or lower your standards. It means you stop tying your value to the outcome of your efforts. It means you begin the journey of growth from a place of compassion, not self-criticism. I think a lot of people fear that if they accept themselves, they'll stop improving. That self-acceptance will make them lazy or complacent. But in my research and in my life, I've found the opposite to be true. People who accept themselves are actually more likely to grow in meaningful ways because they're not weighed down by shame. They can look honestly at their strengths and weaknesses. They can set boundaries. They can rest. They can celebrate progress without diminishing their worth when things don't go perfectly. That's what real resilience looks like. Let's talk about how this shows up in everyday life. Imagine a student who believes they are only worthy of respect if they get top grades. Every test becomes a test of their identity. Every mistake feels like proof that they're not enough. That student isn't just studying, they're hustling for their worth. Now imagine a student who knows they're inherently valuable. They still work hard, they still want to succeed, but their identity isn't on the line every time they try. When they fail, they can reflect, recover, and try again without falling into a pit of shame. That's the difference between self-acceptance and self-worth built on achievement. Or think about a parent who constantly feels like they're falling short. Maybe they scroll through social media and compare themselves to other parents, thinking, if only I were more patient, more organized, more creative, then I'd be a good parent. But self-acceptance invites a different narrative. I'm not perfect, but I'm showing up. I'm learning. I care deeply. And that is enough. That mindset creates space for growth without the pressure of perfection. In the workplace, self-acceptance empowers us to lead with authenticity. When we believe we have to be perfect to be worthy of respect, we tend to overwork, overcompensate, and avoid vulnerability. But when we accept ourselves, we can lead with clarity and compassion. We can admit when we don't know something. We can collaborate without fear. We can take risks because our self-worth isn't riding on the outcome. I've seen this transformation happen in therapy rooms, classrooms, boardrooms, even at kitchen tables. When people move from self-rejection to self-acceptance, their entire approach to life shifts. They stop trying to earn love and start living from it. They stop seeking approval from others and begin approving of themselves. That kind of self-relationship changes everything. Self-acceptance also teaches us to hold space for others in a more compassionate way. When we're harsh with ourselves, we tend to be harsh with others. But when we learn to extend grace to ourselves, we naturally extend it to the people around us. We become better friends, better partners, better leaders, not because we're perfect, but because we know we don't have to be. It's important to remember that self-acceptance is a practice, not a one-time decision. It's something we return to again and again, especially when we feel like we're failing. It's the voice that says, "This is hard, and I'm still worthy." It's the moment we stop abandoning ourselves in the face of struggle. It's the daily commitment to meet ourselves with kindness, especially when it would be easier to be critical. This doesn't mean we don't hold ourselves accountable. Accountability and self-acceptance are not opposites. In fact, true accountability requires self-acceptance. When we know our worth isn't on the line, we can own our mistakes without spiraling into shame. We can say, "I got that wrong, and I'm committed to making it right," because we are not afraid that being wrong makes us unlovable. We've been taught to believe that self-acceptance comes at the end of the journey after we've proven ourselves, perfected ourselves. But what if we flipped that script? What if self-acceptance is the solid ground we stand on as we do the brave work of growing, healing, and becoming? What if it's the very thing that allows us to move forward with courage instead of fear? You don't have to wait until you're perfect to love yourself. You don't have to fix everything before you're allowed to rest. You are allowed to be both a masterpiece and a work in progress. You are allowed to be growing and still worthy. The journey doesn't start when you finally measure up. The journey starts the moment you say, "I am enough, right here, right now." And from that place, everything changes. We live in a world that loves opposites. It's always asking us to choose: are you strong or are you sensitive? Are you confident or are you humble? Are you striving or are you content? This either/or thinking is everywhere, and we internalize it without even realizing. We start believing we have to choose between ambition and acceptance, between improving ourselves and loving ourselves. But that belief is not only false, it's harmful. The truth is, we can hold both. We can be both. And living in that end space is where real growth, real self-compassion, and real courage live. Striving and self-acceptance are not enemies. They are not opposing forces pulling us in different directions. In fact, when held together, they create a balanced, emotionally healthy way of being. But it takes intentional work to live in that tension, to embrace both our desire to evolve and our need to feel whole as we are. That's the end space. It's not neat. It's not linear. But it's honest, and it's human. For a long time, many of us were taught that the only way to improve was to reject ourselves. We thought if we were hard enough on ourselves, we'd finally become the person we wanted to be. We bought into the idea that self-criticism was discipline and self-acceptance was weakness or settling. But research and lived experience tell a different story. In fact, people who grow in healthy, sustainable ways often do so because they accept themselves. They're not striving to prove their worth, they're striving from a foundation of worthiness. The end space sounds like this: I accept who I am and I'm working on becoming a better version of myself. I love my body and I'm committed to taking care of it. I'm proud of what I've achieved and I still have goals I want to pursue. This is where complexity lives. This is where we move away from perfectionism and into authenticity. It's where we get honest about our messiness, our contradictions, our humanness. Learning to live in this space requires vulnerability. It's vulnerable to say, I'm not done growing, while also saying, I'm enough right now. That duality can be uncomfortable, especially in cultures that thrive on extremes. We're praised for going all in, for pushing harder, for never being satisfied. But we rarely celebrate the person who knows how to pause and say, I'm grateful for this moment, even as I reach for more. That takes self-awareness. That takes courage. When we reject the end space, we usually end up on one of two unhelpful extremes. On one side, we have relentless striving, chronic self-improvement driven by the fear that who we are is never good enough. This is the burnout zone. It's where perfectionism thrives. It's where people wake up every day feeling behind, feeling unworthy, constantly chasing the next accomplishment, the next goal, the next fix. On the other side, we have performative self-acceptance, where we say all the right things about loving ourselves, but deep down, we've actually stopped challenging ourselves. Sometimes we convince ourselves that growth is unnecessary because we're afraid of failure or vulnerability. But healthy self-acceptance isn't stagnation. It's not apathy. It's a deep trust that we are okay now and we can evolve. What makes the end space powerful is that it allows for self-compassion and accountability to coexist. We can hold ourselves accountable to our values, to our growth, to our goals without shame. We can reflect on where we've fallen short without turning that into a story of unworthiness. We can pursue excellence without letting it define our value as human beings. This mindset doesn't just help us, it transforms how we relate to others. When we live in the end space, we become more gracious. We stop expecting perfection from the people around us. We stop judging others as a way to mask our own insecurities. Instead, we see others as fellow humans, flawed, growing, deserving of love. That empathy becomes the foundation for stronger relationships, more inclusive leadership, and deeper community. Think about someone you admire not for their achievements, but for their presence. Chances are, they live in this space. They strive, but they're not frantic. They accept themselves, but they're not complacent. They radiate a sense of groundedness. That's not by accident. That's what happens when we stop hustling for our worth and start moving from it. Practicing this way of living isn't easy. It requires intention. It requires checking in with ourselves regularly and asking, am I striving because I believe in myself, or because I'm afraid I'm not enough? It means noticing when we start judging ourselves harshly and choosing to respond with kindness instead of criticism. It means letting go of the idea that there's some magical point where we'll finally have it all together. That point doesn't exist. But we don't need it to. Because growth and grace can happen side by side. In educational settings, this mindset shifts the culture entirely. Students who are encouraged to live in the end space learn that failure is part of learning, not proof of inadequacy. Teachers who model this mindset create classrooms where curiosity matters more than perfection. The goal becomes not just academic success but emotional resilience. And in workplaces, leaders who embrace both striving and self-acceptance build environments where people feel safe to grow, safe to be seen, safe to show up as they are. At the heart of this way of being is the understanding that we are not broken. We are becoming. And becoming doesn't require shame. It requires truth-telling. It requires courage. It requires space for contradiction. We can be proud and imperfect. We can be successful and still learning. We can be content and still driven. That's not weakness. That's maturity. So the invitation is this: step into the end space. Let yourself be both a seeker and a settler. Celebrate your wholeness while honoring your hunger. Strive from love, not lack. Accept yourself deeply and still hold space for growth. You don't have to choose. You're allowed to hold both. In fact, you're meant to. When we talk about the relationship between striving and self-acceptance, it's tempting to treat them as two distant lands. On one side, we have striving ambition, drive, the desire to improve. On the other, we have self-acceptance rest, compassion, the belief that we are enough as we are. And so many of us feel caught between the two, unsure of how to reconcile the push to grow with the need to be kind to ourselves. But there is a bridge between these two worlds. That bridge is vulnerability. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's not about oversharing or putting your heart out in the open without boundaries. Vulnerability is the courage to show up, be seen, and be honest about who we are without knowing how it will be received. It's admitting we don't have it all figured out. It's choosing truth over comfort. It's allowing ourselves to be deeply human in a world that constantly demands we be something more polished, more certain, more perfect. Why is vulnerability the bridge between striving and self-acceptance? Because you can't do either one well without it. Striving without vulnerability turns into perfectionism and burnout. We chase unattainable ideals, hide our flaws, and pretend we're fine because to admit struggle would feel like failure. On the flip side, self-acceptance without vulnerability becomes a performance. We say we love ourselves, but inside we're still hiding the parts we're afraid are unlovable. In both cases, we're still protecting ourselves from being truly seen. But when we bring vulnerability into the mix, something powerful shifts. Suddenly, striving becomes an act of courage instead of fear. It becomes less about fixing ourselves and more about exploring our potential. Vulnerability allows us to say, I want to grow, and I'm still figuring it out. That kind of striving has heart. It's grounded in self-awareness and compassion. It makes space for failure, for uncertainty, for humanity. Likewise, vulnerability makes self-acceptance real. It's easy to say I accept myself in theory. But it's a different thing entirely to stand in front of a mirror, look at the parts of yourself that have been bruised by shame, and say, you're enough. That moment is vulnerable. It's not comfortable. But it's the kind of moment that changes lives. Vulnerability gives self-acceptance teeth. It moves it from theory into practice. It says, I'm willing to love myself, even here. Even now. Even in this mess. The truth is, we've been taught to run from vulnerability. We've been taught that strong people have it all together. That competent people don't struggle. That successful people never doubt themselves. But those ideas are myths. Every person you admire has wrestled with fear, uncertainty, and shame. The difference is not that they've avoided vulnerability, it's that they've learned to walk through it. I've seen vulnerability transform classrooms, boardrooms, families, and friendships. I've watched students admit they're struggling and find unexpected support. I've seen leaders say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn, and gain the respect of their teams. I've watched parents apologize to their kids, partners speak their truth, friends stop pretending, and people find freedom on the other side of their fear. None of that happens without vulnerability. In education, we often tell students to strive for excellence, but we rarely teach them how to fail with dignity. We reward them for achievement but give them very little room to be human. And yet, vulnerability is essential for learning. It's what allows a student to ask for help, to admit confusion, to try something new and risk getting it wrong. It's what turns a classroom into a safe space for growth, not just performance. In our personal development journeys, vulnerability is the moment we admit to ourselves that the hustle hasn't made us feel whole. It's the moment we look at our constant striving and ask, is this really leading me to the life I want? It's what allows us to get honest about the cost of perfectionism, the weight of shame, and the parts of ourselves we've tried to outrun. That honesty isn't easy, but it's necessary. Vulnerability also invites connection. When we show up as we are, not as who we think we're supposed to be, we give others permission to do the same. That shared humanity builds trust, empathy, and belonging. And when we feel safe, we grow. We try. We forgive ourselves. We try again. Vulnerability creates the conditions for both striving and self-acceptance to flourish side by side. We can't talk about vulnerability without also talking about fear. Because to be vulnerable is to risk being misunderstood, rejected, judged. And yes, sometimes those things happen. But more often than not, what we find on the other side of vulnerability is understanding. It's connection. It's someone else saying, "Me too." Vulnerability is the birthplace of every meaningful thing: joy, love, innovation, growth, resilience. It's not a detour on the journey. It is the journey. So what does it look like, in practice, to walk the bridge of vulnerability between striving and self-acceptance? It looks like being willing to try, even when you're afraid to fail. It looks like taking off the mask of "I've got it all together" and asking for help. It looks like resting without guilt. It looks like celebrating small wins without needing them to prove your worth. It looks like speaking your truth even when your voice shakes. It looks like choosing compassion over comparison, curiosity over judgment, progress over perfection. This kind of life, this wholehearted life, requires that we hold both striving and self-acceptance in the same hand. And vulnerability is the hand that holds them. It's what allows us to move forward without abandoning ourselves. It's what gives us the courage to grow while still being gentle with who we are today. The world doesn't need more polished people with perfect resumes. The world needs more humans willing to be real. Willing to be seen. Willing to show up with all their striving and all their softness. Vulnerability is not just the bridge between the two. It is the place where we meet ourselves and each other fully, and that is where the real transformation begins. Hey friends, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the channel and hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching.